Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Faith for Dummies. How are you, Izzie?
I'm good, thank you. Hello Rob, hello everyone else. I'm very tired and I've got a scratchy throat, so I apologise for the quality of my voice. How are you, Rob?
Yeah, I'm good. I also have an itchy sore throat as well. And I sound a bit coldy in my own head. I don't know if it comes across, but yeah, there we go.
Well, this tone will just be like slightly lower.
Yeah, mellow.
Deeper voices.
You could say we're both suffering slightly, couldn't you?
Ha 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 ha. That was an awful joke. Can anybody guess what today's theme is?
Well, it'll be on the title, won't it? So
that is very true. We are going to talk about suffering today. But first, do you have any dummy moments, Rob?
Probably, but none that I can think of. So no. Do you have any?
Yeah, I do. I think it was last week that this happened. I sleep in a house that is not the one that I spend the most time in. So my partner lives in this house. I spend my whole day here. I work here. And then because we're not married yet, I sleep somewhere else. And I had packed up all my stuff. It was like 11 p.m. Went to the car, got in the car. I was like, okay, I'm going to drive back. It's really cold. It's raining. I'm really tired. I drove back, got to their house, got out of the car, looked at the keys in my hand, realised I did not have the house key. And it was approximately 11:30 at night and they go to sleep at about 9. And I was like, oh my goodness, I can't wake them up, but I don't have a spare key and I don't want to drive all the way back and get the key. So that was my dummy moment, that I drove 10, 12 minutes across town to just drive back again to get the key.
To then drive 10, 12 minutes back town again. So you spent about half an hour in a car.
It's not the first time it's ever happened to me and it's very irritating.
Well, thank you for sharing. Keeps us humble. It does keep us humble, doesn't it? It helps us.
It's one of those moments that makes you think, I am not a put-together grown-up.
When do you think that happens, being a put-together grown-up?
I'm really not sure. I'm not sure.
I'm still waiting.
At all, yeah.
So it's clearly not in your 30s. Maybe it's in your 40s?
Maybe. I'm going to ask my mum if she feels like a put-together grown-up.
Maybe no one feels like a put-together grown-up.
Maybe we're all just children, Rob.
Children of God. Anyway, I think we've said, haven't we? But today, we are looking at suffering. Now, it's a big topic, and we're probably not going to justify it all on this little podcast episode. But we do think it's important. We do want to give it some time and some space to talk about it. So we are doing it. And we won't have all the answers. And we think it's probably going to be a longer conversation for you guys to have with parents, mentors, church leaders, youth leaders, and stuff like that. And if you know us personally, do absolutely feel free to chat to us about it as well. Not that loads of my young people listen, but there we go. And I think it should just be a good discussion. Hopefully, that's the plan. So, yeah, Izzie, you've done a little bit of research on this. Do you want to take us somewhere to start with?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we talked about doing an episode on suffering and then we both kind of just looked at each other wide-eyed because that's such a huge topic and you could have an entire podcast about suffering, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Like there are books and books and books about suffering as a Christian. So I think it's safe to say we're not going to attempt to cover it all. But I was thinking that probably most of our questions about suffering come down to, if there's a God that loves us, why do bad things still happen? And I think that can feel like a really simple question sometimes, and somebody might ask that and you're like, well, of course bad things happen, you know, we live in a fallen world, blah, blah, blah. And then at other times the answer can feel like, you know, when that bad thing is happening to you and you feel like God isn't answering your prayer or he's not loving you in the way you want to be loved, that's so hard. I think basically there's a lot of things in life that hurt or that are difficult or that are unfair. And we're not going to sit and tell you that that's not true. We're not going to tell you that you just need to be grateful or anything like that. But I think it would be good to just look at the Bible a little bit and see what that has to say about suffering, and maybe just use these things as like a springboard to talk to a friend. So if we kind of point you in the right direction with the Bible, and then you can kind of use that to talk to your friends about it. So in John 16, I'm just going to jump around a little bit. John 16:33, we're told that in this world we will have trouble. But Jesus says, take heart, I have overcome the world. So Jesus isn't shying away from the fact that we will suffer, but he reminds us of his saving work and what he has done. And in Matthew 16:24, so another gospel, he says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross. And actually makes it really clear that if we're going to follow Jesus, there's going to be some element of suffering. Now, that might be about suffering for our faith. That might be about being persecuted, being laughed at, being ridiculed, being punished for our faith. But there's also types of suffering that don't have anything to do with other people as well, aren't there? Like illness and things like that. But, just to say that Jesus doesn't say, follow me and you'll never suffer again. And I think some people genuinely think that Christians believe that. And they will say to you something like, I don't know how you believe in God when you look at the state of the world or when you go through something really hard. And it's quite difficult to say to somebody, I don't believe in God because I think he makes everything shiny and better. I still believe that I'm going to suffer. And other references to suffering in the Bible, in Romans 5 talks about, which I think you did a talk on over summer, over New Year, sorry.
Yeah, I did, yeah.
How suffering produces perseverance produces character, and character produces hope. So actually there is a purpose to our suffering, and God can use our suffering for growth. That's not to say he throws you into suffering because he wants to see you flail around and try and get out of it. But actually he can use what you're going through to grow you, to grow your character, and ultimately to grow your hope and trust in him as a kind of better hope. There's something better coming. And finally, just the reassurance in the Psalms that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. And that is far from the only psalm that talks about suffering. But actually, God is close to us when we're suffering. Yeah. He's close to us when we're not suffering. But often people find that they feel closer to God and they know his presence more when they're going through something difficult. Now, all of those things can just sound really trite and silly if you're going through something. But Rob, I wonder if you've ever felt comforted by what the Bible has to say about suffering before when you've been going through something?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, I did that talk on Romans 5 at our New Year camp, and I think the example that I used was, it's like pruning a bush, a rose bush or something like that, and to do that you have to remove the dead flowers, which is going to be painful, but you do it in a certain way so that when it grows back in a better way. And I know nothing about gardening, so suffering produces perseverance, character, as you said. And when I was writing that talk was quite helpful for me. I am also going through, I've mentioned it before, I've got like a pain that I wake up with, and it's kind of like an ongoing thing every morning that I wake up with. And I think there's a verse in 2 Corinthians 12. Google it if you want to know the exact quoting, but it's Paul talking about having a thorn in the flesh, a thorn in his side, so that he doesn't become arrogant, kind of keeps him humble and whatnot. And I try and, seeing as it is in my side, take a little bit of comfort in that. And yeah, so what was your original question? I forgot, sorry.
No, I just said, have you ever taken comfort in the Bible when it comes to suffering, or kind of any of those things that the Bible says about it? I mean, we've had people on the podcast like Grace, who talked about losing her mum, and Dan, who talked about depression, and various other people as well in that time, who've shared testimonies of actually some form of suffering, whether it was an emotional thing or a physical thing or a grief or a longing for something. And actually they all have different ways of having lent on God in those times. And a lot of them would explain that actually in suffering or after suffering, they could kind of really see God's hand in their life and through that suffering. It doesn't always mean that in the moment you will feel that. I remember being in hospital, being in a severe amount of pain, and I couldn't even speak, but just praying in my head and being like, God, I'm really suffering right now. And a lot of people, share their testimony where they were really ill and God was really close to them, so they just felt happy. And I'm not feeling that at all. And I didn't feel it. And actually, it was kind of only in hindsight I could see some of the little bits of how God had still been good to me. Yeah. But also, it doesn't mean we have to turn every single difficult moment into it doesn't mean we have to turn it into, how is this good for me? Or how can I find peace in this? But like you said, we can turn it into a prayer or a reminder that actually, some of the greats in the Bible have also suffered, and that God didn't promise that they wouldn't suffer, but he did promise to go with them.
Yeah, and I think Dan's interview that you did a couple of weeks ago is just really good anyway, but he also said along the lines of, I've been given this, and at the minimum, it can help me with other people going through the same thing. And if that's our baseline minimum, then that's good, isn't it? And yeah.
Yeah, I think, like we said, we can't answer every single question, and there's probably someone listening who's going through something really hard and is like, this is not helpful. and we can't answer every single question, but I thought it might just be helpful to have a look at one person in the Bible who suffered. There are plenty of people in the Bible. But maybe just take this as a kind of springboard for a Bible study. And if you are going through that time in your life where you just feel like you're crying out to God and you're in pain or difficulty, maybe go away and have a look at this and study it with somebody.
Is it Jesus by any chance?
Do you know what? It's not Jesus. And it's also not Job, who is the poster boy for suffering and pain. I thought we could just quickly look at Joseph. And a lot of us will know the story of Joseph, particularly even if we're not Christians, from the musical and stuff like that. And I think sometimes when I teach the story of Joseph, or when people reference the Joseph musical, it makes it seem like what Joseph went through just happened in a really short period of time, like a few months or weeks. But actually, Joseph's story is that he was betrayed by his brothers, he was sold into slavery, he was accused wrongly, he was put into prison, they forgot about him in prison for a really long time. And all of those things took years and years and years. I feel like when he was first put in prison, he was in there for something like 7 years. And then they came in and he was hopeful for release, and then it was another 7 years before he was released. It's something like that, but we're talking years and decades of his life here. And he presumably was sold into slavery in the first place when he was quite young. And then it's not until he's an adult, potentially a fairly old adult, I don't know the numbers, I really should have looked this up, that he becomes a leader, that he saves people from famine, that he forgives his brothers. And right at the end of his story in Genesis 50, there's a very famous line which says, he says to his brothers, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." And again, we can look at that and we can go, oh yeah, one person betrays me and hurts my feelings, and I can say that line. But actually, that was Joseph's whole life. His whole life was not what he expected it to be, and was a life of difficulty and suffering and punishment for something he hadn't done. And he still managed to say, but look what good God has done through this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm having a quick Google search as we're recording. It says various different things, say various numbers, but it's around about 13 years of intense suffering. Suffering began 13 years of hardship. Yeah. So a long time, and really long time.
And I think if you're listening and you're a teenager now, that's potentially how old Joseph was. And then imagine not even seeing the sun until you were in your late 20s. That's a long time. That's half of the guy's life. Yeah. And that's he was still able to say that. And something I learned the other day, my pastor was talking about this story, and he said, if God had answered Joseph's prayer to be released and to go back home, then Joseph would have been released and sent back home to a country that was about to be plunged into famine with no way of being saved. But because of his dreams and what he did whilst he was in prison, the food was able to be saved for the famine. And his brothers, so his family, were able to come and receive that food and be kept alive. Yeah. And so it's really easy sometimes to kind of think, well, if only God will answer my prayer. But actually, we can't always see the rest of that. And I know it can be so hard to feel like maybe your life is collateral damage in that. Why did Joseph have to suffer for that to happen? Couldn't God have made it happen another way? But we just have no idea what God is doing sometimes. And that's the part of the suffering, is that we can't know the bigger picture. Yeah,
it's applicable for a lot of things, but there's a piece of artwork in the room that I'm currently recording in. If you ever get up to a piece of art really close, you can have a look in detail. You can see what's going on. You can see everything in that small fraction of the piece of art, but you can't see the big picture. And if you take a step back, or a couple of steps back, you can see more and more until maybe you can see the whole thing. It's like we're looking at a piece of art really close, and we can only see a little bit of it, and we don't really know how it fits into the bigger picture. And maybe it's what you think, but it might well not be. And if you put yourself in Joseph's shoes for a minute, I don't think there's any chance he would have thought basically being the prime minister of Egypt was what was going to happen. Except, actually, having said that, he had a dream right at the start, didn't he, that his brothers would bow down to him. So maybe that was conflicting even for him. He was thinking, God's given me this dream where my brothers are going to bow down to me, and I've been in prison for 7 years, and more to come, which I don't know about it. How am I going to get there? Like, yeah, it shows a bit about his perseverance from the Romans verse that we read. Yeah, and it's just true, isn't it? So, yeah.
Yeah, and realistically, like, all of this can be said, and you can hear all these kind of Bible stories of people where suffering made sense in the end, or suffering worked out in the end, or it was for a greater good, or God did something for them. And you may have people in your life where they've been through something, and then, you know, suffering was kind of it had a good ending. But you will also know people, or have heard of people, where they just suffered their whole life, and they held on to God, and it looked like God never kind of rewarded that, or never came back with that. But we just have no idea what's happening on a spiritual level. We have no idea what their life, their eternal life, looks like with God, you know, once they've died. And I think that's the other thing we have to remember, is that God works on a spiritual level. Again, it's not to make you cheer when you're suffering. Nobody's going to be doing that, but actually to kind of just be speaking to God about it, and just acknowledging that you maybe don't understand. I have a friend who I literally had to stop talking to about some of the suffering in my life, because I felt that they had never suffered. I looked at their life and asked them about their life, and I was like, you've never suffered. You've never wanted for anything. You've never been really hurt or in really difficult times. Nothing's ever been unfair for you. And that's still really hard when I see people like that, because you're like, God, why am I suffering? Why are they not suffering? But we just have no idea about the spiritual level. We also have no idea about the future of someone's life either, and what might happen to them when they're, 60. So, yeah, I think it's such a hard topic, but we can take comfort from the Bible and how it explains suffering and the stories of suffering, that actually God may have a purpose through it, will have a purpose through it, and can grow you and walk with you in that.
Yeah, that's cool. And I know I joked about Jesus earlier. Is that who we're looking at? And also, you mentioned Job, didn't you? So they're both examples of suffering that you can go away and look at. But the thing about Jesus' suffering was it was so selfless. It was so for us. And if you think about, if you actually read it and think, try and visualize it in some of the stuff, he had thorns in his head, like, ow. He was whipped. And it says something about the whips that they used. I think there was like bits of flesh coming off. And sorry, should have given a bit of trigger warning there. He was a carpenter, wasn't he? So he would have been quite muscular, which meant that would have hurt more, maybe. And then, yeah, I think sometimes the Bible can be not very visual in my mind, and I actually have to stop and think about it and think, right, not an animation, not a cartoon, humans, what's going on here? And it can change your perspective like that, can't it? Like, I'm so grateful when I think about it. I'm just so grateful that's what he did for us.
And even with Jesus' suffering, like, we often do, and that's not wrong, like, we often do look at the physical side of what he suffered on the cross and leading up to it, but also on the spiritual level that we probably can't quite understand. Like, he was ripped from the Father. Like, he had to suffer not knowing God, and that is, like, God's holiness and goodness and love was, like, that's where it all came from. So Jesus had to experience what it was to not have any of God's goodness and gifts, and to be ripped from him when that was his, loving Father who he'd never been apart from. And I think, like, the depth of that suffering we can't really understand either, but actually he did all of that for us. He chose to do that suffering. Like, he didn't have to go through any of that. We don't really get a choice about when we suffer, but he chose to, so that we may suffer here on earth, but actually we won't suffer for eternity, because one day that suffering will be over. I think I could speak for hours on this and we could go into a very long heaven and, all of that kind of stuff. But I am going to stop us. But I thought it might be helpful to just leave you with a few questions that... Oh, sorry, I just hit the microphone. I thought it might be helpful to just leave you with a few questions that maybe you could talk about with a mentor, a youth worker, a parent, whoever is the right person in your life. So, some questions. Maybe have a chat about... Why do you think, so your mentor, why do you think God allows suffering? Have you ever gone through suffering that changed your faith, and can you explain why? How do you think a Christian should respond when life gets really hard? How do you keep trusting God when things feel unfair in your life? And what Bible passages or stories particularly helped you in difficult times?
Good questions, deep questions. There might be a long conversation, mightn't it, if you ask all of them?
Yeah, but my point being that this podcast alone is not enough to talk about this stuff. If you know Rob and I or any other youth leaders or mentors in your church, then they will be the people to chat with, and you'll be able to explain your particular situation of suffering as well. But I think it's the kind of thing that really needs some chat and some prayer, and probably a long time of looking at this and talking to God about it as well. But hopefully we've just given you a bit of a springboard to think about some of these things and some of the bits of the Bible that might help you think that through. Yeah,
great. Well, thanks for all your research and everything that you've done, Izzie. What are we looking at next week?
Next week, for once I actually know, and Rob doesn't. Next week, we are talking to a friend of mine about anxiety and how they get through life as a Christian, as well as being a very medically anxious person, and how those two things can go together. So a bit like our depression conversation we had recently, we just wanted to see what advice and encouragement they might be able to give. Yeah, brilliant. Looking forward to that. Be really helpful. Otherwise, I think that's it. So we will hopefully see you. We will see you again. And thank you for listening, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.